the sufferer. In the Psalms, we meet one who suffers intensely and who is at the same time righteous and yet bearing the burden, being treated as a sinner. He's righteous but being treated as a sinner, and he is crying out for vindication and praying for vindication and in some way confident of vindication. These people that we meet, often it's David in the Psalms of David, but not always. Sometimes it's one of the sons of Korah, sometimes it's the anonymous psalmist who wrote Psalm 119, or the anonymous psalmist who wrote Psalm 137 by the waters of Babylon, and who in the middle of the psalm you get this individual voice coming that is heard. I take it they all speak by the same Spirit, who is the Spirit of Christ, and the New Testament indicates to us that this Spirit, the sufferer, the righteous one who bears the burden of sins and cries out for vindication, finds its fulfillment in Christ. It's a tremendous theme in the Psalms. It's replete with quotations and echoes. Most famously, of course, in Psalm 22, a cry of desolation, my God, why have you forsaken me? Cruel mockery, the casting of lots for his garments, and so on, all fulfilled in the cross of Christ. Into your hand I commit my spirit, he cries in Psalm 31. Again, Christ on the cross. He's hated without cause, Psalm 35, Psalm 69. He experiences the agonies of betrayal, Psalm 41, Psalm 55. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me, Psalm 41. Zeal for God's house consumes him. The reproaches of those who reproach God fall on him. He's given sour wine to drink. He cries out, I thirst, Psalm 69. He's the stone rejected by the builders in Psalm 118. He's the one around whom the cords of death entwine their terrible tentacles, Psalm 18. He's the sufferer of Psalm 40, who comes into the world determined to do God's will. He's the man whose soul is greatly troubled, Psalm 6 and elsewhere. He suffers and he suffers and he suffers. Writing just of one of the Gospels, Professor Rick Watts says that Mark's passion narrative is replete with echoes of the righteous sufferer psalms. And he goes on to give many examples. I think it's true of all four Gospels. Not only does he suffer, he's righteous. He walks by faith, this figure, and in obedience to God. He cries out for vindication. He's confident of the vindication. He's the sufferer of Psalm 16 who faces Sheol, but is confident that his body will not be abandoned to corruption. The cords of death entangle him, the snares of death confront him, but he calls on the Lord and he's delivered, Psalm 18. His bones won't be broken, Psalm 34. In the end, he'll be the victorious king ascending on high, Psalm 68. He cries the cry of dereliction at the beginning of Psalm 22, but by the end he's vindicated, and he tells God's name and sings God's praises in the midst of the great congregation. He's the stone rejected by the builders, and yet he's the cornerstone or the capstone. He's the sufferer of Psalm 6, whose soul is troubled, but by the end he will say to his impenitent enemies, in the words of that psalm, depart from me, you evildoers. And all of these are quoted or echoed in the New Testament. I'm not going to plod through the references, but they're all there. Again and again and again, in this voice of the righteous sufferer, we hear the voice of Christ in his humiliation, in the cries for vindication, the expectation of deliverance. We hear his loud cries and tears, Hebrews 5, verse 7. More than one individual in Old Testament history, but each speaking by the Spirit of Christ in his humiliation. It's been said that the Psalms give us a window into the inner life of Jesus Christ. And I think that's a very profound thought, that the Gospels just give you little insights into what's going on inside the heart and soul of Jesus. And there's a sense in which the Psalms throw that window open wide, and we get a real sense of his heart, his loud cries and tears. I've been reading I'm reading at the moment in my personal devotions a wonderful book by a 19th century Free Church of Scotland minister called Hugh Martin, called In the Shadow of Calvary. And he has the most wonderful section where he talks about the imputation of our sin to Jesus, our sin being reckoned to Jesus' account. And he just draws out some of the strength of that and the ways in which the psalmist, when they feel themselves burdened by the wrath of God against sinners, that is fulfilled in the imputation of our sin to Christ. So there's the first theme. That will come as no surprise, but it's very widespread. Sometimes people speak of the Psalms as singing the songs of Jesus. That's a simplification, but it's not a gross simplification. It has a lot of truth.